Gakuin University in Tokyo, Japan. And he asked the question, what is philosophy? And that's the topic of my presentation, because metaphilosophy, that's the question. Metaphilosophy, what is philosophy? So metaphilosophy means thinking about philosophy itself. And I'm from the United States, but I've been living in Japan for about 40 years now. And one of the reasons I got interested in philosophy was because of the question, why do people think differently? Now think about it for a moment, because we all live in the same world, you know, we encounter the same things, we see the same things around us, but we all have completely different ways of thinking. We're informed by our religion, by our sense of ethics, our sense of what our cultures teach us. So why do we have all of these differences in how we think? We ought to be able to think in the same way. And then this, this is related to the question of cross-cultural ethics that Daryl was talking about before. In this room, we have people from a variety of different countries, different cultures, different religious backgrounds, different philosophies, different ways of thinking, and we're confronting the same problems. When we think of climate change, that's a problem that affects all of us. But we come from cultures that all think about these issues differently, and somehow we have to come up with a way of being able to talk about these problems, and in some cases coming to agreements about what we're going to do about these problems. And how do we do that if our starting point is the fact that everybody thinks differently? So that's kind of the issue that I'm interested in, and that's one of the questions that we raise in metaphilosophy, which basically means thinking about philosophy. So I'm going to go through rather quickly the material I have here on the handout, and then try to leave more time for discussion. But when we talk about metaphilosophy, there are various disciplines that form that contribute to our understanding of ethics. One of the first of these is religion, and we all come from different religious backgrounds. And within religions themselves, there are different approaches to how cross-cultural we are. Fundamentalism is, I think, an issue that appears in every religion, and if you get a group of fundamentalists from different religions together in the same room, I think it's going to be a disaster, because all of them believe that their own religion is the only true religion. But that's not the only approach that we can have. For myself, I do have my own religious commitments, but I've been able to learn something from every religion that I've studied, and I've been able to incorporate that into my own way of thinking. And in the West, I'm from the United States originally, our sense of logic, for example, is really simple. Aristotle said, either something is or it is not, right? And that's it. Those are the only choices. Now, the people from India, you're going to have to help me a bit on this, right? I'm just reading this recently. In Japanese, we say Jaina-kyo, and in English, Jainism. But how do you pronounce that?
Jainism.
Jainism, okay. Jaina-kyo in Japanese, right. Yeah, I was just reading this recently. Okay, in the West we have true or false. It exists or it doesn't exist. In Jainism they have about 7 different categories. And they start with the idea, probably it exists. Not it exists, but probably it exists, right? Right? Possibly it doesn't exist, right? And then maybe it exists and it doesn't exist at the same time. And then maybe it doesn't exist, it exists and it doesn't exist. I'm getting confused. But you got the idea, right? The system that they use for logic is much more rich and more complicated than what we have in Western logic. And I think that's really interesting. And rather than say, well, my Western way of thinking is the preferable way of thinking, there's a lot that I can learn from other traditions and other religious traditions. So I don't try to block off the idea that I have nothing to learn from it. I have my own religion. I have nothing to learn from another religion. I think we do. And then the relationship between science and philosophy, that came up, too, and that's the next 2 topics on my paper here. Let me introduce this with a story. I was attending a conference on whaling at Kokuda Daigaku, the United Nations University in Tokyo. And this is a really controversial issue in Japan because Japan just recently was resumed whaling. We had a conference about this a while back, and it was rather impressive. There were about 20 countries there, including countries from South America along the rim of the Pacific Ocean, from Australia, New Zealand, and up through Southeast Asia. About 20 countries there, and the only country that was defending whaling was Japan. And the guy who's the head of the representative from Japan, the International Whaling Commission, was there. And I'm kind of impressed because all these other countries were kind of ganging up on Japan, and he was trying to defend Japan. But at the conference, this issue came up because, during one of the break times, this biologist came up to me, and he's an ecologist and studies about whaling issues, and I had given my presentation about philosophy, and he came up to me and he said, you philosophers, how do you think you can philosophize in the absence of scientific evidence? Because he was a scientist. And he said, you have to know how many whales there are in the ocean. You have to know, what the characteristics of the whales are. You have to have all of the scientific knowledge. And you philosophers, you're always philosophizing, but you never pay attention to science. You kind of accuse me. And he's right. Yeah, a lot of times philosophy, we don't care about what's going on in the real world. That's true. But we need to. Right? Philosophers need to take science into consideration. But the other side of this is, what I want to say is, you scientists, hey, why do you scientists always just give us scientific knowledge? We still need to know, what are we supposed to do about these issues? You can collect all the science that you want about global warming and climate change, and that tells us absolutely nothing about what we should do in response to that. So I feel that science and philosophy need to be working together in some way. Science gives us a description of the way things are in the world, and then philosophy is basically trying to decide, what do we do about it? And ethics, that's basically what ethics is. It's just deciding what do we do with respect to any given issue. So next we have some methodological approaches, and this is very, very similar to what Daryl has talked about before. Back when I was inspired, when I first met Daryl back in the 1990s at the scuba roundtables that Daryl mentioned, we talked about these same issues. And what I'm going to say now is kind of similar to that, because we have some methodological approaches to intercultural philosophy. How do we talk about these issues from an intercultural perspective from people from different countries? And one way is comparative philosophy, which is fairly popular. And we're simply saying, this is the way people from this country think about something, and this is the way people from another country think about something. And it's useful, but it's not genuinely intercultural. I just said, you think this way, we think this way. And to be intercultural, and then a lot of times what we also say is, okay, I understand what you're saying, I respect what you're saying, and then isn't that so nice? But what we need to move to is, I think, an intercultural perspective, which is not simply comparative. We can't just say, you have your culture, I have my culture, we understand each other, we respect each other, and now we have to work together. Right? My wife is Japanese, and I don't tell my wife, oh yes, I understand and I respect you, and she understands and respects me. We have to make decisions together about things like where do we send our children to school. And we need to negotiate. We need to have dialogue with each other. We need to come up with a solution to these problems that solves the problem. Just one quick example about this with my wife. Right? In Japan, there's a custom that when a little baby is born, the baby sleeps between the father and the mother. So here's the father, here's the baby, right, and here's the mother. And that's what my wife wanted to do because that's part of Japanese culture. Right? For me, being from America, I said, put the kid in their own room. I don't want to sleep next to the kid, so that was my culture. Now that situation, you can't just say, oh yes, I understand you, I respect you, How can we have to solve the problem in some ways? And I think the one key thing, this is what philosophy contributes, is using the imagination to come up with solutions. So in this particular case, right, here's, my wife's idea is, father, baby, mother, right? I said, put the kid in the other room. So what we finally came up with was, right, father, mother, baby. So we came up with a completely different way of thinking about this issue to solve the problem, and everybody's happy. But notice, we can't solve that problem simply by science. We can't solve it by saying, well, in America they do it this way, and in Japan they do it this way. We have to think of something completely new.
Why not baby, father, mother?
Well,
because you wanted to sleep.
There was a reason for that.
I'm joking, of course.
I know, but a real true reason is when I sleep, I tend to jump. I don't want to kill the kids. That might be another possibility. Yeah. Something that's come up recently, experimental philosophy. I think this is really new, and maybe nobody knows about this. But recently, so this is not just comparing what do people from different countries think, but they actually give them a problem, and then they ask them, how do you solve this problem? So your grandmother is dying from cancer. Do you tell her or you don't tell her? We might make that a survey question. That's one way to do it. But another way to do it is say, okay, here's the problem. Now, you tell me what you would do in this situation, and how you would do it, and why you would do it this way, and then you just let them go. right? And then they contribute their own ideas about what we should do, and they give the rationale, the justification for why we should do that. And the philosopher, this is called experimental philosophy because we simply listen to what other people say. And part of the idea behind this, I think, is really good because we've had the idea for a long time that philosophical issues should be talked about by professional philosophers. But what the experimental philosophers want to say is we can go out and ask people from other, just ordinary people, what do they think about these issues and how do they think about them? And we come up with completely new ideas that philosophers never thought about by themselves. So it's very, very democratic, I think, as well. Then metaphilosophy, which is thinking, philosophically about philosophy, is like metacognition. We think about things, but then we think about how we think. And metaphilosophy, we have these opinions about what we should do, and then we think about what's the justification? Why do we think something? Can we come up with good reasons and why we have certain ideas about what we should do? And normative philosophy, this is related to what Darrell previously called prescriptive philosophy. But there's different ways of approaching normative philosophy. One way is for the government or somebody to make decisions. This is what you should do. This is what you're allowed to do. This is what you can't do. That's normative and maybe prescriptive. But there's another approach to this, which is through dialogue. If we're going to think about what we should do, maybe we need to talk about these issues and through a process of dialogue, come up with the norms that we're going to use to govern the relationships that we have. It's the same way that my wife and I talk about what to do. We don't just say, hey, this is the way we're going to do it. Right? We talk about it, and through this process of engaging in dialogue with people from another culture, we're able to create or construct. So and this is one of the key points in my own ways of thinking about these philosophically. Constructivism is the idea, we can't just say you have your culture, I have my culture, we respect each other. We have to build a bridge between our cultures. And the other point is this bridge doesn't exist right now. Right? It's something that we construct, something that we build. And we do this through the imagination by trying to come up with new ideas about how to solve these particular issues. And then finally, applied philosophy, which Darrell also talked about, which is we try to apply this knowledge to practical problems that come up in the everyday world that we need to solve together. Now maybe, we don't need to solve, these things they're relational because we're related to other people and we need to come to agreements with other people about what we do, but we don't have to come up with some kind of universal plan for everybody. My wife and I decided, right, the father, mother, baby, that's how we decided, but what you decide might be completely different from that. So we're not necessarily looking at something that's universal for everybody, right? We're looking for things that are related to the particular situation that we find ourselves in. But in other cases, there may be reasons for us to think about, about being universal or near universal with issues like climate change, because those are something that affects everybody. It's not something that just affects me and my wife and my family. So, in the metaphilosophical approaches to intercultural philosophy in general, there's a couple of approaches that are kind of come up recently. And the first one I have here is called common ground approaches. And this advocates the idea of what's called perennial philosophy. One of the guys who's promoting this is a guy named Wall. And perennial philosophy is basically the idea that you look for something that is common in all philosophical or all religious traditions. Something like love, love of life. In Buddhism, right? In Christianity or Islam, we might talk about love. In other religious traditions like Buddhism, they use the word compassion. But close enough. So we try to look for some kind of common standards that we can use in these kinds of situations. Now this is not a bad approach. I think it's good. We can plausibly look for common standards, but it's really hard on the basis of just finding out what we have in common to talk about particular problems. Because we do find something in common. In anthropology, for a long time they thought the incest taboo was universal, right? You're not allowed to have sexual relations with your mother, your father, or your brother or sister. Then they found out actually in ancient Egypt that people do practice incest. So try to find universals that apply to all cultures is kind of a tough thing to do, because we have so much cultural variety. But that doesn't mean that we can't try. That it might have limitations as an approach to intercultural dialogue and bioethics. Another one is stand your ground approaches, right? And this this has become really popular now with postmodern philosophy. Postmodernism, you know, it looks like a really progressive idea because the idea is you have your way of thinking, I have my way of thinking. I don't try to force my way of thinking on you. You know, we just respect each other and everybody has their own way of thinking. So it's kind of popular these days. It has a lot of problems, right? And one of the main problems is, you know, we stand our ground. And the idea is this is the way I think, and that's the way you think. Right? Now maybe we respect each other, but here's the problem, the main problem. This is the way I think. That means I'm not willing to listen to you. That means I have nothing to learn from you. And that means that if I just stick and stand on my own ground, my perspective becomes more narrow. And if I want to widen my perspective, one of the ways to widen my perspective is to go out and talk to people who are different from me and find out about different cultures. And this is why we say diversity is a good thing. And even more than that, after I talk with other people from a different culture, I'm willing to change my mind as a result of what I hear. It's not that it's, oh yeah, I understand you. Right? I'm willing to say, yeah, I can evaluate, do I like that idea or I don't like that idea? And I can integrate that idea into my own way of thinking. I've been in Japan now for about 40 years, and I've had many personal experiences that are like this, taking something from Japanese culture and making it part of my own. One thing that Americans like to do is complain. Right? We were climbing Mount Fuji. I was taking a group of students from Japan and the United States up Mount Fuji, and we're climbing up Mount Fuji. The American students all the way up complain. Right? When do we eat? You know, where's the water? Right? Where's the toilet? You know, how much longer do we have to go? Complain all the way up. And the Japanese students, they were just walking up, the sweat is coming down. They're tired, there's no complaining. And in Japan, okay, now you have to help me with Japanese. This is the idea of gaman suru. We endure the situation. Yeah? At that moment, when I looked at the American students, I looked at the Japanese students, I said, I want to be like the Japanese students, not like the American students. I changed my way of thinking. So we're open to changing our own perspective on these issues still. And that leads us to the next point, right, which is, construct new ground approaches, which is building bridges across culture. And rather than just say, I have my culture and you have your culture, and nothing to learn from each other, by sharing, we actually create something new. And one of the guys that talks about this is a German philosopher, Fritz Walter, who I mentioned. Then we also have some methodological approaches in part 4 to intercultural ethics and bioethics. And Daryl talked about this too: descriptive ethics, right, experimental ethics, normative ethics, metaethics, and applied ethics. And basically, these apply to all of the the areas that I talked about previously. Descriptive ethics, we just describe what people think. Right, experimental ethics, we look at ethics from the point of view of giving people actual problems to think through and see how they'll try to solve those problems. Normative ethics, we try to make a decision about what we do in any given situation. Metaethics, we try to find out what's the procedure for determining what we take to be the correct, or the best method for dealing with certain problems. And then applied ethics, actually applying those to particular. But I want to jump to the next stage, part of 5, some ethical approaches to intercultural bioethics, because I can identify 3 basic approaches to these, and my own favorite approach is the third one, the constructivist approaches. But let me go through these other ones first. The first one is realism. And the idea of realism is that somehow ethical norms exist objectively and independently from human consciousness. And this is, in my opinion, a very, very difficult position to defend. Right? All of us, I think everybody here would agree that the sun and the moon exist. We have no problem with that. Right? But if we want to say this ethical principle or this ethical idea exists objectively, we're going to have lots of disagreements. So it's really hard, in my opinion, to be able to establish a realist foundation for talking about positions. And this leads then to the next idea of monism, the idea that if we have any kind of bioethical question, there's only one answer. What is death? Right? We can find out what is the one answer. He finds exactly what that is. And take any other issue and we're looking for one particular answer. And then we have universalism. Once we find that one answer, that means that one answer applies to everybody. So it doesn't matter which culture you come from, right? Everybody's going to end up thinking the same way. And it's also absolute, which means it takes place over time. It's not something that's going to change tomorrow. It's something is ethically true, that is going to be true forever. And take this. Okay, this might be controversial for this audience. Might be. Take an idea like "Thou shalt not steal," right, which comes up in the Judeo-Christian religions, one of the Ten Commandments. Right, don't steal. And we say, well, that's an absolute because it applies throughout history. Think about this, right? Don't steal assumes that we have an idea of property. And if you go back in history a long time ago, we had no concept of property. Right? And if you don't have a concept of property, you can't have a concept of stealing. And some cultures also, they don't have a concept of property. You just go out to the jungle and pick the coconut, and then you don't have the idea that this is my tree. So these ideas that we take to be absolute and universal, a lot of times when you look at them a little bit more carefully, maybe they're not so absolute. And this leads to the other idea, the idealist approaches, which I think are really popular, especially among younger people, because hey, you have your way of thinking, I have my way of thinking. We don't try to, make trouble for each other. And it's also very popular in the field of intercultural communication. And that's part of what I do also. Part of what I do is kind of like connected to environmental ethics and bioethics, but I also hang out with these social scientists who are doing intercultural communication. And this is their main approach. The main idea, everybody thinks differently, and it's okay. So, associated with this is the idea of pluralism. So any given bioethical question, many different answers are possible. There's no single answer. You have your answer, I have my answer. We just respect each other. Which means relativism. We look at different cultures as having different norms. The definition of death in Japan is different from the definition of death in the United States, for example. And we have historicism, the idea that these norms change over time. And a lot of these things are true. I mean, our norms do change over time. In Japan, we don't have samurai anymore. In the United States, we don't have slavery. We do change our norms about what we think is appropriate in any given moment. But this idea is, and that's okay. Because anything's okay. Samurai, that's okay. Slavery, that's okay. Anything's okay. It just kind of changes with history. Then the constructive approaches, which I kind of favor, this is the idea that ethical norms are constructed through the transactions we have both with the objectively existing world, right, and intersubjectively between people from different cultures. Now, within constructivism, there's kind of a popular position called social constructivism, which I really kind of don't like. And this is the idea, social constructivism is like this, okay? If we, among people from various cultures, agree that global warming exists, then global warming exists, because we agree that it exists. And if we disagree and say, no, global warming doesn't exist, if everybody disagrees that it doesn't exist. And this idea is actually kind of popular among people who call themselves constructivists, because the idea is that constructivism is simply a matter of reaching agreement with other people between cultures about what we should do. And once we reach that agreement, the case is solved. We don't have to do anything further. But I think there's lots of problems with that too. Because, we can both agree, we can say, this coffee imagine that this coffee has poison inside. And then, we say, oh yeah, it's just coffee. I agree, you agree, it's just coffee, no poison. We both agree, we drink the coffee, and we die. Alright, so maybe it's a good idea for us to look and see what actually is in the objective world, before we say we're going to reach this intersubjective agreement about what we're going to do about something. So constructivism that I advocate says we need to find intersubjective agreements between people from different cultures in relation to what's actually going on in the real world. So that's my own position. And then the idea of pragmatism. I'm American, and pragmatism is maybe the main national philosophy of the United States. So I might be a little bit narrow-minded here, but this is what I think my culture can contribute to this discussion in terms of pragmatism, which is the idea that it is possible for us to have more than one answer to these questions. Okay? We accept the idea of pluralism, but we do need enough convergence. We do need enough agreement to be able to solve the problem. Right? Now let me give an example. I'm going to do the next one too. Actually, I'm going to kind of jump down, but let me do this now. Let me give an example. let's imagine that we're trying to deal with environmental ethics. And maybe one perspective on environmental ethics might be very, very scientific. We say we follow Darwin, and by following Darwin, we realize that all species are related to each other, so human species should be accorded more value than other species. Therefore, we have an obligation to protect the environment. And that's the Darwinian view. And then let's say we have a Judeo-Christian Islamic view. God creates the heavens and the earth. Therefore, right, we should become environmental ethicists because God, created everything. Okay, and here we have two completely different meta-philosophical positions. One is Darwin, based totally on naturalism. The other based on religion, which is based on supernaturalism. In the end, they're both saying we need to protect the environment. So despite the fact that we might have these different, different positions in meta-philosophy or meta-ethics, still we might be able to work together on similar issues because we're looking at the results of our thinking, not the starting point. So even though we have a naturalist philosophy or supernaturalist philosophy, we can both come to the same conclusion that we need to care about the environment. Okay, and relational cultures, we exist in relation to people and others. We can't understand any given culture simply by looking at that culture by itself. Japan, I think, is interesting because for a long period of time, right, during the Edo period from roughly 1600 to about the middle of the 19th century, Japan was totally isolated. So people often say that we can look at Japanese culture in isolation from other cultures. But really, look at Japanese culture. Before the Edo period, we had a relation with China and Korea, and I don't think we can understand Japanese culture unless we look at the relation Japan has with Korea and China. After the war, after the opening of Japan in the middle of the 19th century, we have a lot of relations with Germany. Japan's legal system, medical system is from Germany, isn't it? So when we look at what is going on in Japan now, we have to look at that in terms of the relationships that Japan has with other cultures. And we're constantly in this process of changing our cultures because of these interactions. So we should treat this positively rather than something negative. And then next, the idea of co-evolution, the idea that when norms evolve, they don't evolve simply as a result of what I think. They're resolved in relation to other people. Biological evolution and Darwin's theory of evolution, the idea of co-evolution has become more popular these days. And the basic idea is you have a butterfly and you have a flower. The butterfly co-evolves in relationship to the flower. The butterfly needs the flower in order to evolve. Without the flower, there's no butterfly. So evolution is not simply a matter of the organism evolving by itself through its own internal processes. Rather, evolution is always something that happens in relation to other species. And the flower also needs the butterfly to transfer the pollen from one flower to the next. So if you don't have a butterfly or bees or something else that transfers the pollen, you don't have a flower. So evolution, we look at it in ecological terms as a kind of co-evolution. And think about that in terms of cultures as well. When we look at our cultures are not simply a matter of our own internal development. We're always, this relationship that we have with people in other cultures. And if we remain open to those people, then we can learn something from them as well. Now, some norms may go extinct. As I mentioned before, we used to have slavery in America, but we don't now. And also, new norms need to be created to deal with new situations. And this is, I think, one area where bioethics really has a lot to contribute. Because as Daryl mentioned also in his talk, so many new technologies are coming up. And what do we do about these new technologies? We did, 100 years ago, we don't have to worry about things like organ transplants. And now we do because of technology. We didn't have to worry about genetic engineering, but now we do. So these problems are emergent, and as these new problems come up, we need to find new ways of dealing with these problems. Now I've been to a couple of conferences, academic conferences, not this one, but some other ones with philosophers, and you get presentations like this, right? What did Aristotle have to say about global warming? And And the answer is not very much. And, they give a whole presentation looking at Aristotle and what his ideas are and talking about global warming or something. But my idea is, global warming is a new problem that we didn't have to deal with. And we need completely new ways of thinking about this. We have to create these. And this also points out some limitations, I think, when going back to the old philosophical views and the old religious views. We need to kind of come up with new ideas for these things, and that's part of the idea of constructivism. Right. And I'm down at the bottom right now. Dower is a principle from world ethics, which I think is good. Where the lines of cause and effect run across nation states, so do the lines of moral responsibility. And also, I'm jumping down the C here, convergence. We only need to converge with respect to mutually shared problems. We don't have to agree about everything all the time. Within bioethics, I think that there are cases where, and you can think about this from the point of view of law, too. Cases where we can recognize, different countries are going to have different laws on different specific issues. In Japan, the last that I've heard, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but death is defined as the death of the whole body, right? The heart has to stop beating, right? In the United States, right, death is defined as brain death. Once the brain dies, then the rest of the heart might still be pumping, right? Okay, and so we have a difference of definition here about death, a cultural difference, how we define death in Japan, how we define death in the United States, but there's also a practical consequence of this, which is, in Japan, right, because we accept death as being when the heart stops beating, that means organ transplants are really, really tough. And that becomes an international issue because a lot of people from Japan end up going to the United States to get organ transplants because they can do that in the United States. So here's the issue that I want to say. Some of these issues, I think we don't need to talk about cross-culturally. Right? It's possible that we may have ideas about death in Japan that are different from ideas about death in the United States. And maybe we can say we respect those differences. We don't have to come to a common understanding. We don't need convergence on those. We can accept divergence. But when they become, this is Dower's point, when they become intercultural, when the actions that are taking place in one country have an effect on what's going on in another country, then it becomes an international issue that we need to come up with some common understanding. Now, how do we do that, right? I'm posing that as a problem, and that's what we need to talk about, I think, in bioethics when we talk about a practical issue like this. But in terms of the philosophy, the metaphilosophy for how we go about talking about it, right, we need to talk about it if it's intercultural. And the way that we need to talk about it is by being open to other people's opinions, and then at the same time we have to be able to construct a new way of thinking about this that might not have existed before. And let me conclude then with this concept of third cultures, because in my own experience, right, a lot of times what I find myself doing is combining aspects of Japanese culture and aspects of American culture into my own way of thinking. And, as I mentioned, I've been here in Japan for about 40 years now, and my identity, if you ask me, people ask me, are you really American? Well, my sister thinks I'm not really American. So every time I go back to America, my sister says, oh, you became really like a Japanese. I mean, there's a couple things, I don't know if you know this, but in Japan, people always point to their nose, right? Me, in America, me, right? But they do me, and my sister says, why are you always pointing at your nose? And other things, right? Being in Japan a long time, I apologize all the time. In Japan, you apologize for everything. I'm sorry. I go back to America, I apologize. I'm sorry. My sister says, why are you apologizing all the time? But I've been in Japan and I've changed, and I've become like a Japanese. But I don't become completely Japanese. There are still things from my own culture that I value. Right? My second son, he joined the tennis club at his high school. In Japan, they have a cultural system. It's called senpai kohai. Right? Senpai means the older, the experienced, people, and then the kohai are the younger, inexperienced people. So, excuse me. So when my son joined the tennis club, right? When he first joined, he was, the inexperienced, junior member. His job was to chase the tennis balls around the tennis court. right? I mean, they wouldn't let him play. The second year, then he became, the senpai, he became the senior, then he's finally allowed to play. The first year, basically, he chases the balls, cleans the tennis courts. And that's Japanese culture. Now, I'm sorry, but I don't agree. I don't agree. As an American, my cultural value is equality. So living in Japan, it's not like, since I'm an American living in Japan, I try to become like a Japanese person. I can't do that. Even if I try to act like a Japanese person, I'll just look stupid. I just look stupid if I really try to look like a Japanese person. I have to keep some of my culture, my own cultural identity. But I pick and choose, right? There's some aspect of Japanese culture that I want. I try to be gaman. I try to be, endure when I'm climbing the mountain. But I don't necessarily accept the idea of senpai. And my own culture too. I give up things from my own culture. I give up the idea that I'm going to complain about everything, right? But I keep my idea that I believe basically in equality. And this is what we mean by making a third culture. In our own way of thinking, we're able to combine aspects from the other culture, combine aspects from my own culture into a way that I can integrate into my own way of thinking. Now, if I can do that as an individual, right, and there might be possibilities for us to do that intersubjectively across cultures. You've got an idea, I've got an idea, we put those two ideas together with each other, we talk about it, and we see what we can come up with. And we might be able to create a third culture. Just a simple example, okay, this is not sophisticated for bioethics, but just a simple example. Japanese pizza. Right? You're from Italy, right? Where does pizza come from? By the way, where does pizza come from?
From Naples. From Naples.
Naples.
From Italy, right?
Yeah.
The story I've heard, now you may disagree with this, but the story I've heard is that really, right, Italian spaghetti, the noodles come from China.
Yeah, right.
When Marco Polo went to China, he found noodles and he brought them back to Italy. And the tomato sauce comes from South America. When the explorers went to South America, they got the tomatoes. So the tomatoes from South America and the noodles from China, they met in Italy and they made spaghetti. That's a third culture. And then spaghetti comes from Japan. We have wafu-style spaghetti, Japanese-style spaghetti, which means you put all kinds of really strange things like seaweed, right, on top of the spaghetti, which, do you put seaweed on top of spaghetti in Italy? See? And then people would say, but that's not real spaghetti. Yeah, that's Japanese-style spaghetti. But why not? We create something new. And if we can do that with spaghetti, maybe we can do it with bioethics too. That's the idea. Okay. Maybe I used all my time.
So thank you very much, Richard. So good time for questions.
I think you in Tsukuba University.
I was at school, yeah.
Yeah, I remember you.
Yeah.
Evanoff. Your name.
Your face looks familiar.
Yeah. I was there in 1998.
Probably I was around the same time.
I've seen you.
I really liked your talk, and I thought the abstract was like a blueprint for a paper or a book which I could use, like putting some other particular question and then working through this order. But you started with one original question which does not appear on the title nor on the abstract, which is why people think differently. And you moved immediately to the intercultural perspective, with which I strongly use words today, which I can strongly find personal connections, since my own daughters are half Indian, and I enjoy their intercultural breeding. But the first answer I give to the question, why do people think differently, is because they have different bodies. The obvious example is men and women, or several other genders, whichever. And then you can go to more minute differences. For example, yesterday I ate at a restaurant And there were two tables, traditional Japanese style, low table, people sit on the ground, and the rest of the tables were normal Western size. And then people used their body differently, so I guess that people who grew up using chairs, unlike people who grew up sitting on the floor, use their body differently and therefore have different experience and different expectations from their experiences, from the worldly experiences. And my point is that it is an often neglected theme, because we often think that we think with our minds, and minds somehow located in the brain, and the body is sort of appanage, and we can do well, we just place it somewhere, and then we start thinking, and perhaps it's the other way around. Perhaps we start with the body, and body enables us to learn and to experience and to become. And by the way, what you're saying about the nose, it's very funny, because well, if a Jew would have said it would have point like this, and it would still point to the nose. So between a Jewish and an American. So I mean, well, okay, made my point.
Just one comment on that. One person I've been influenced by, as I mentioned, I'm American, and I'm influenced by American pragmatism, but John Dewey said something very similar to what you said. His basic idea to start with is, we don't think to begin with, we just act, you know? And then as we're acting, we're engaging ourselves, our body is engaging itself in the world, and then we come up with a problem. And it's only after we come up with the problem we start to think. So thinking is something that emerges out of action, rather than, as you said, this idea of thinking is we sit like Descartes, and we sit in the room and we start to think inside our own heads. You know, we engage ourselves with the world in our bodies.
Precisely, and John Dewey was a student of Alexander, who invented the Alexander technique. So it was very much about body awareness and how it influences thought and education, etc.
The only question is, how do you aware of your body?
Body is being aware, because when you are moving your finger, you have sensation. People who are paralyzed do not have the proper sensation anymore to move their bodies. Actually, the only part of your body you hardly aware of, in the sense of sensation, is your brain. Well, unless you have a headache. But the rest of the body you feel directly. And that's the reason once you begin controlling sensation, like in Tai Chi, you can start manipulating the body, because you can manipulate the sensation. So that's the beauty of it. Baby starting for the first time, able to stand. It's a new sensation. He wasn't thinking about it. He learned how to do it with balancing sensation in his body. And then we lose it.
Can I make one point about that too? A book that I read when I was a student, and this is one of the books that made me interested in coming to Japan. It was by a guy, I think his name was Eric Haribo. He was a German guy. He came to Japan and wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Archery. And he was studying archery while he was here in Kyudo in Japanese. He was studying that while he was here in Japan. And you asked, your question was, how are we aware of the body? But his teacher kept telling him, don't be aware of the body. If you're always thinking about, is my eye positioned right? How's my hand? How is my body positioned? Then you're going to mess up. And what you want to do when you're studying archery is forget about your body. But I think, that's not contradicting with what John Dewey said, because what John Dewey said was, there are moments when, we do want to think about our body. We do want to think about how am I holding my hand and so forth. We need both, but it's not that we're always, throughout our whole lives, constantly thinking about what we do. And if we do constantly think about what we do, we mess up. Try riding a bicycle and you're saying, oh no, where do I put my foot next? You know, if you try to ride a bicycle and constantly thinking about what you're doing, you're going to fall down. So you kind of like lose your awareness into like this consciousness of yourself being united with the activity that you're doing.
Okay.
When I went to Africa, to Senegal, many years ago, we met a local tribal group that shows us the building in which the village council meet for taking decision. And we noticed that the ceiling was very low. I am a tall person, so when I stand up, I hit the ceiling. And I asked why this is the only building with the ceiling so low. They told me because here we have to make important discussion and decision. So if the ceiling is low, no one can stand up and say, okay, I am right. And also the voice remains low, and you are the body, the structure of the body. So the structures of dialogue. Who chooses the ground of dialogue? Who chooses the special structures of dialogue? Make an example. I was a politician, a local politician in Italy. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. But I was a politician. And I tried to contact the local gypsies groups to create a concept, a multicultural concept. African, Nigerian, and also gypsies. And so, in our democracy, the principle is one man, one vote. And they told me no. One, the chief, decides for all. The chief must be a male, not a female. Female don't decide. It's very difficult to choose a common ground for making decisions because they don't accept the idea that one man, one vote. The chief decides for all. So it is. So what to do in this situation? Which ground? The local council, the European Union, the United Nations. Which is the ground? Which is the structure that guarantees the dialogue between different kind of people, different idea of politics, for example.
Okay, Robert? Yes.
Regarding philosophy, would you think that philosophy is an interdisciplinary study?
Say that again,
Philosophy is interdisciplinary study or multidisciplinary study or international study? This is the first question. And you may say yes, but I don't know how you define. If it's so, if you say yes, how would you think about the philosophy from philosophy to experience? The philosophy is the intellectual communication, but experience is actually you know through having anything else, the body or the mindful things. You can testify this is the truth because I did this so instead of intellectual reply. So that kind of question is thinking because philosophy is considered the kind of analogical approach or theoretical approach without doing that. But how about if you do sports, art, any other experiences required thing? Would you think this is a philosophy? If yes, how would you consider the philosophy? From philosophy to experience matter.
First question, pretty easy. Probably we're not using interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary, if you have a problem, like if you're working on a bioethical problem, you get the medical people coming and get the biologists and legal people, and they all share their perspectives. That's interdisciplinary. Transdisciplinary means you're coming up and trying to integrate it into a holistic framework, like Daryl talked about before. It's not just each discipline is contributing something. You're trying to come up with a package, so to speak, where everybody's contributing. So that would be my approach to transdisciplinary. On the other issue, again, I want to go back to John Dewey, talking about primary and secondary experiences. The idea of and you can see this in the Japanese philosopher Nishida Kitaro, too. I don't know if you're Yoshida Kitaro, Japanese philosopher. But the basic idea is when you're having a pure experience, you hear a bell, you hear the ding, and if you're in pure experience, you don't have any thoughts about that. Just it's just an experience. Then later you might ask yourself, what am I hearing? Is that a bell? Is that, what kind of bell is it? Where is it coming from? We start to ask all of these questions. So the thinking comes after the experience, and the purpose of the thinking is trying to make sense of our experience. And I think that's philosophy and the relation between philosophy and experience, observation. We experience, we observe, we see things, we act, and then we start to reflect on those kinds of things. We go up through various levels of reflection. Just a quick comment about yours too, about the political thing. This grew, I don't know, about 10 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. There was a guy from Tokyo University who talked about the political aspect that I thought was really interesting. And this shows about the democracy aspect too. When we talk about these issues, maybe we need to be as inclusive as possible as we can. And the example that he gave was a politician someplace in Japan, I can't remember the city, they had a patch of land and they wanted to make it into a park, and what to do to make the park. And the administrator had, we should have tennis courts and we should have this and this and this. Right? And then the people didn't like that. And so, he realized, they're not going to vote for me, if I don't follow what, they want to do. So then he was in a position of, he tries to please the people who want the tennis court, but that doesn't fit with the people who want the golf course, and then there's all these conflicts. What he ended up doing, which I thought was really interesting, is he put all the citizens together in a room. And he said, okay, come up with a decision. And then he left. And, then they talked with each other. Now, in philosophy, that seems to me to become pretty close to what Jürgen Habermas was talking about with his idea of the German philosophy, his idea of discursive democracy. Right? When we're trying to make these decisions, if we want to do it democratically, we try to get everybody involved and we try to let everybody give their opinions about what's going on, rather than trusting authority and feedback. And a lot of people say, well, that doesn't work because everybody's got different opinions about stuff. But in reality, it often does work. And there's, some case studies in the United States, environmental problems that have been solved. What do you do about Lake Erie? Lake Erie died, a couple decades ago. And how to solve that problem? They just got different communities together talking about what to do. And so there's possibilities, I think, for discursive democracy as an approach.
Any other comments? Yes.
Additional things. The reason why I'm asking this question is when students hear the term philosophy, your philosophy, like that.
Yeah, especially in Japan.
Yeah, but thinking of philosophy is one could be an expressive philosophy, like attitude, emotional things. That could be a philosophy. The second one could be active experience philosophy. Instead of waiting, we do this, then that kind of philosophy. The third one could be accepting philosophy, like ding, like that. Afterward, thinking that. Why I'm raise this issue that philosophy should be not like philosophy. That should be like everybody can learn philosophy. It's an easy thing. You have philosophy. That it has to be aware. Having philosophy is very important for everybody. So this is my issue that understanding philosophy could be different way by understanding bioethics as well. This is a point.
And just one quick point. I agree, not everything is rational, not everything is analytical. Emotions play a big role in philosophy too. I was just thinking about this recently because when I was growing up as a student, all of my teachers told me emotivism, the idea that we decide ethical issues by using our emotions. They said that's wrong. Right? We have to use logic and reason to decide what we're going to do. But then I was thinking about this, in Europe when all the refugees from Syria were coming through Turkey and then they came to Greece and there was this awful picture of a little boy 2 years old drowned on the beach. You know that picture that I'm referring to? And you see the little boy drowned on the beach and you have an emotional reaction to it. And then when I saw that picture, I thought, this is wrong. And that idea, this is wrong, it's not analytical thinking, it's an emotional response. And so we need to see how emotions influence our attitudes towards ethics too. And it's not just analytical thinking. And it's something that we do in everyday life. I think I'm going to adjourn.
Richard, I have a question for you. So, some difficult issues, such as cannibalism, or slave labor, child labor, incest. So, what happens when we seem like we need to enforce our opinion against somebody's own ethics?
And this leads to issues like universal human rights. And cannibalism, people eating other people. I actually use this as an example with my students. And the students tend to divide into two positions. Most of the students say, it's their culture, if they want to eat each other, it's okay, go ahead. That's what most students say. And then a few students are going to say, we have universal human rights, so we have to think about that. My idea about human rights, universal human rights, is still constructivist. If you read the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, no country in the world follows all of those. Right? And how was that created? We created it by getting together and talking about what do we think is important in human rights. We create those human rights. Some people say human rights, like Aristotle, human rights come from nature, we have natural rights. Rights come from religion or something else. But I think they're created deconstructive. So on a cannibalism, we need to talk about it. Discursive, yeah, that's the word, and that's Habermas's word too, discursive. We need to sit down and talk about it. And by the way, in Papua New Guinea, when they have cannibalism, it's been outlawed. The government doesn't support it.
So I can talk while I'm in the pub? Please don't eat me. This is why. Manuel from Barcelona has a question. Your perspective and experience around religious dogmas during the aforementioned constructivist approach in cultural differences between religious dogmas. Are there some religious dogmas? How do we deal with those?
Yeah, and I think these problems are what they sometimes call intractable, which means if you've got the idea that God created the heavens and the earth, and then you've got Darwin's idea that we can explain that without appealing to God, and you put these two people in the room together, I think it's going to be really hard for them if they take the dogmatic point of view. But I think what constructivism says is be open to another perspective. In religion, don't think that my religion is the only true religion, and I have nothing to learn from Jainism or other religions, but take what you can learn. And not everybody I agree that not everybody has that point of view, which is one of the things that makes religious dialogue, I think it's really good.
Okay. Any other comments? So I think we had an interesting dialogue. Thank you very much, Richard.
Your children are sleeping.
Now we sleep with my kids, right.
Solution.
Unfortunately, they're all in their 30s now, so they got their own beds.
It's a kind of solution, sharing the American culture and the Japanese culture, and your solution or your the experience is not the American way, not the Japanese way.
Yeah.
So, mother, father, baby.
We come up with a
I'm
new
curious
way.
about your children's assessment.
Yeah, and my children too, if you ask them, each of my kids have got different reactions. If you ask them, are you Japanese or are you American? My eldest son would say, I'm neither. I'm me. Don't classify me as being Japanese or American. My second son would say, I'm both. Right. My third son would say he's Japanese. My fourth son would say he's American. So they each have like a different perspective about their identities, and it influences how they act about things. My third son, he's Japanese. He does things in Japanese way. And my eldest son, he's neither. He does things his own way.
So you create a new way?
Yeah, and my second son is the best one at creating new ways because he thinks that he's both.
Okay, good. Thank you.